This is the 6-0 Quartz, and it is the new budget option from 6-0 that is targeting people who are upgrading from their first paddle or considering purchasing their first paddle. It's a great paddle, but it has one small catch that I want you guys to be aware of when making your decision. So, let's talk about it. The Quartz comes in at a price of $89.99, and if you use discount code PBStudio, you can save 10% on your order. This is a standard shape paddle coming in at 16 inches in length, a handle length of 5 inches, which is shorter than most handles you see on the market these days, a raw carbon fiber face, grip size of 4.25 inches, swing weight of 108, twist weight of 6.4, static weight of 7.9 ounces, spin of 1966 RPM, core thickness of 15 millimeter, which is a little bit different than the traditional 16 millimeter that you see, and a warranty of 1 year. The Quartz is probably one of the most control-oriented paddles that I have played since the Selkirk Luxe Control Air. You really don't see a lot of control-focused paddles coming out these days, but I think the price point that the Quartz targets, it makes sense. Having reviewed primarily all-court and power paddles recently, it was almost jarring going back to a paddle that focuses on control so much. I found anything related to the soft game felt really nice, and it was easy to place the ball where I wanted. However, what this did come at the expense of was pop and power. I found that I was having to take very big swings at the kitchen in firefights, and it was almost exhausting how much I needed to swing. I found my arm a bit more tired at the end of the session than I'm used to when using an all-court paddle. I also found myself dropping almost all of my third shots because I found drives to just be pretty ineffective, at least for me. And it was a lot quicker to get to the kitchen by just dropping the ball. I ended up playing more of a style where I move people around and wait for a pop-up or opening to jam my opponent rather than trying to beat them with pure aggression. This isn't meant to be a power paddle, so it didn't really make sense to try and play a power player style. If you are someone who needs the paddle to give you more control, the Quartz does that very, very well, and is the standout quality of this paddle. I would describe the feel of the ball off the face as plush and dense. When you're hitting balls in the center of the paddle, it has a very soft feel while also feeling pretty substantial. I also felt that with the shorter 5-inch handle, I felt more connected to the paddle, particularly for aspects of my soft game. While I personally prefer longer handles because of my two-handed backhand, I do find that I usually have slightly better control over the ball when I'm using a paddle with a shorter handle. To me, it seems like with the shorter handle, I'm less wristy and likely to add unnecessary movements to my shot. So I think for beginners who have less control over their movements, they may benefit from the shorter handle as well. Since this paddle is going to be primarily targeted at people who are newer to the sport, I want to take some time to explain a few things. First, let's talk about swing weight. Swing weight is a measurement we use in pickleball to describe how hard it might feel to swing a paddle. On average, paddles range from about 105 all the way up to 125. There are outliers that go even lower or higher, but on average, this is what you can expect. Anything below 113 is going to feel very fast in the hand. So when you're at the kitchen line and getting into a firefight, you shouldn't have any issues swinging the paddle. 113 to 118 is about average for most paddles, and then 118 and beyond may start to feel heavier and slower in your hand. The Quartz has a swing weight of 108 and an average static weight of 7.9 ounces. Together, these should create a paddle that feel plenty fast in the hand, especially when compared to a lot of other paddles on the market. All right, so let's talk about the sweet spot of the Quartz. This is where my primary concern comes in. The sweet spot is just a bit tighter than a few other comparable options in this price range. The Quartz is a Gen 1 design instead of a Gen 1.5 design like the Vatic Prism Flash and 11.624 Jelly Bean, which are also in a similar price range. Gen 1 basically means it's a paddle where the face materials are sandwiching the core and then nothing else. Gen 1.5 is the introduction of foam into the edges to make the paddle more forgiving. Gen 1.5 design paddles tend to have larger sweet spots and give you more margin for error at the edges when compared to a Gen 1 paddle. The areas where I find myself noticing the tighter sweet spot was out of the air resets and in firefights where it can be trickier to nail the center of the sweet spot in a quicker motion. When I did miss, instead of feeling more dense like the center does, the edges started to feel more hollow and tinny. Whereas on a Gen 1.5, since you have the extra mass in the edges, it helps make those areas feel more substantial on the paddle. These days, we're in a market full of Gen 2 thermoformed paddles, and those have basically set the bar for how good a sweet spot can be. The downside to Gen 1 in comparison to Gen 2 and Gen 1.5 has always been the sweet spot size, and the Quartz is no exception here. Now, does all of this mean the Quartz has a bad sweet spot? No, it doesn't. And to illustrate my point even more clearly, here's a chart of how I would categorize paddle sweet spots. On the left side, you have a bad sweet spot, in the middle is average, and then on the far right is a great sweet spot. The Quartz to me is right in the average sweet spot zone, while Gen 1.5s are pushing into that great sweet spot territory. Paddles that I would consider to have a poor sweet spot are the Adidas Metalbone, the Gearbox CX11s, ProKenix Black Ace, or other low twist weight edgeless paddles, generally speaking. So you don't need to feel like you're going to get a paddle with a bad sweet spot, it just isn't an exceptional one. Okay, so to wrap up this review, it's a confusing decision in my mind for Sig Zero to release a Gen 1 paddle instead of a Gen 1.5, especially when it seems like Gen 1s are slowly getting phased out of the industry. Had they gone Gen 1.5, I think it would have been an absolute home run and contender for one of the best budget paddles in 2024. The only thing holding it back is that it isn't as forgiving as the Gen 1.5 paddles in this price range, which I think are going to give the Quartz some stiff competition. My only guess for not doing it is that they didn't want to cannibalize the sales of their premium paddles. Since Gen 1.5 paddles tend to be very competitive with other performance paddles, making the Quartz a Gen 1 creates a clear line of separation from the entry line and the premium line. So who is this paddle for? I think it is for players who are just upgrading from their first cheap paddle, or this is their first paddle ever. This is the type of paddle I could see people recommending to their friends who are just getting started and don't want to start with a Target or Amazon paddle. You have a shorter handle for those beginners that don't need a long handle. You have 6 color options to pick the one that fits you best, and a control-oriented paddle that is coming from a reputable brand that you can trust. These are all things that I think are good and valuable to a player coming into pickleball. Who I think it probably isn't for are the paddle enthusiasts who are looking to absolutely maximize all value and performance metrics. That doesn't mean some of these enthusiasts wouldn't appreciate this paddle, but I think in 2024, a Gen 1 paddle is going to be much less appealing to someone who has been in pickleball for a while and has access to other great paddles already. You need to remember that this is meant to be an entry-level paddle, so I don't think it will be as exciting to those who already have a performance-based paddle. So anyways, there you guys go. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.